Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. This is Shinichi Honda from the UNEP. So welcome to the International Forum for Sustainable Asia and the Pacific, so ISAP 2022. And we are going to organize its thematic track 14, Global Initiative and Good Practices for Mitigating Open Waste Burning. Open burning of waste is one of the common practices around the world. Even high-income countries had such operations before. However, we recognize open burning of waste is emitting pollutant to the environment, and it causes adverse impact to human health and the environment. And we can say open burning is still traditional and normal operation as one of the disposal operations of waste. Many countries still need to rely on open burning and open dumping of waste because there are no options for them. And unfortunately, open dumping and open burning is still solution for municipal solid waste management in many countries, despite the fact that we do recognize that open burning and open dumping of the waste is mismanagement of waste. And many people may understand that open burning and open dumping is the cheapest operation of waste management. It may be true in terms of the immediate operational cost, but we have to include externalities, how open burning of waste causes adverse impact to human health and the environment. In that case, open burning of the waste is the most expensive operations for waste disposal. So we have to really realize this situation. So if we continue open burning of waste, we continue polluting our environment by emitting many pollutants from waste. So as a collaboration between UNEP and IGES, in particular through the IGES Center collaborating with UNEP Environmental Technologies, so CCET, and the International Environment Technology Center of UNEP, where I belong to, have been working together to combat those issues, so open burning issues. And probably you may participate in the previous webinar half a year ago that we had a discussion of the open burning of waste. And today, this session is one of the follow-up activities. And we have 7 speakers, and they will be able to share the latest activities and their knowledge, how we can prevent open burning of waste and how we can prevent our health from such negative issues. So we're gonna hear presentations today for next 55 minutes. Then I'd like to ask each speaker to keep your presentation around 6 to 7 minutes so that we may be able to have probably 5 to 10 minutes for Q&A and discussions. So first, I'd like to invite first speaker, actually my colleague Sandra, but we have the recorded presentation. So let me ask the secretariat to show her presentation.
Good afternoon. My name is Sandra Masonex, and it's a pleasure for me to be here. Today, I will talk about the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, why we work on open burning of waste, and what are we doing. And before I start my presentation, I would like to thank CCET for inviting me to participate in this very important event. Please excuse that I'm not there, that I'm not doing this live, that I'm sending a recording, but the time difference wouldn't allow me to be live. So what is the Climate and Clean Air Coalition? It's a global voluntary partnership dedicated to addressing short-lived climate pollutants. It was established in 2012 to support urgent and collective action on short-lived climate pollutants. And since then, the coalition has grown into a global network with membership from 73 countries and 78 international organizations and NGOs that carry out activities around the world and across economic sector. The coalition is a cooperative group led by state partners. We focus on achieving high-level political engagement, which is critical for driving change. Like I mentioned, we work on short-lived climate pollutants, which are four, and they are black carbon, methane, tropospheric ozone, and HFCs. And these are climate forces that are many times more powerful than carbon dioxide, and they're also air pollutants that are harmful to people, ecosystems, and agricultural productivity. As their name says, short-lived, they're present in the atmosphere for a few days up to a few years. One of the short-lived climate pollutant is black carbon, and you can see here all the different sources, which waste is one of them. From the waste, we can tell that about 5% of the black carbon emissions come from waste. It has a lifetime in the atmosphere of up to 2 weeks, and then it has impacts all over from the health and the climate, and snow and ice, agriculture and ecosystems, and the weather patterns. So when waste is burned, that's why we get black carbon, and so the resulting toxins. What results are toxins in particulate matter, which includes black carbon, and this can cause air pollution, impact the human health, also strain health facilities due to the increase of health problems related to the burn of waste, contribute to warming, also impacts animals' health, affect crops, reduce the visibility on roads, and then also it can actually affect economic development because of if there's too much pollution, then maybe people will not want to travel there, and then that's a big impact. Like I mentioned, we from the waste side, black carbon is one of the pollutants that we address, but we also address methane. With those two pollutants, we have several areas of action. For the methane side, we work on the burning organic waste, and then also promoting the capture and use of landfill gas, and if possible, also its utilization. From the black carbon side, we work towards preventing open burn of waste. And like I mentioned earlier, black carbon comes from the open burn of waste, but also from landfill fires. And this could be because the landfill is not managed correctly and leads to fires, or it can also be because of some scavengers lighting up the waste in order to recover valuable materials. Also, black carbon can also come from outdated and polluting vehicles used in the waste collection and transportation. So why is this so important? I mean, we still have a lot of waste that is being burned. It is considered that about 30% of all waste is actually openly burned. So it's a big problem that we still need to address, and that's why we're working on it. So in CCAC, we have what is called a Waste Hub, which basically we work with relevant communities, industry representatives, NGOs, and policymakers to support targeted improvements to technologies, best practices, and policies. From the black carbon mitigation, we work, like I mentioned, preventing open burn of waste by addressing what are its core causes, whether it is not enough collection of the waste. Is it because of culture? Is it because the waste pickers are burning the waste? Is it that we are also landfill fires? So we are trying to see what are the causes and address them and find alternatives to those. So for example, in the case that there's not enough waste collection, that waste collection is increased and seeing how we can do that with the municipalities and the countries. So we have key activities that we do from the CCAC. We work with national government, advocating for action on waste and convening cities in the effort, creating supportive policy and regulatory environment, assisting developing strategies to prioritize finance and engage the private sector, Also with cities and local government, we work with planning and policy capacity. And then we also work a lot with networks and peer-to-peers, supporting regional networks, also transferring specific know-hows and exchanging experiences and best practices, coordinating with other initiatives and programs in the waste sector, like, for example, the International Solid Waste Association, CEET, also Waste-Wise Cities, many other partners that are already working on waste and also addressing some similar issues. And also coordinate and cooperate with the National Planning Hub, which is basically the hub in the CCAC that deals with the governments themselves on national planning. So how can you guys get involved and work with us? You can join the CCAC Waste Hub, either join the full hub or their leadership group, which includes some countries, NGOs, and consultants that are very interested in moving the sector forward. You can also, if there's a city or a country that would like to request assistance in this issue, you can also, there we have something what is just the expert assistance that we can actually provide funds to support projects there. Then our CCAC countries, that ODA eligible, can request support through what we call the expression of interest, which is going on right now and it will end in December. Basically, countries submit what is it that they need assistance with, and that CCAC considers it, the board, and then then we call for proposals for that assistance. Likewise, I invite you to participate in alliances that work in similar issues, like the Waste-Wise Cities, Prevent Waste Alliance. There's a coalition in Latin America for the progressive closure of landfills. And the new one, the multi-stakeholder partnership to eliminate open burn of waste in Africa in 2050, just launched in COP. So that one's going to be a good place to cooperate. Lastly, I wanted to share some of what we do with some of the countries. One of the things that we do is try to get countries to add measures to the NDCs. And in this case, we ask countries to add measures on decreasing open burn of waste. So this one, we have worked with Eswatini and Togo, and through the support that we have given them, they actually have included those measures that are shown here that basically addresses open burn of waste. More information on that, you can find it on their NDCs. Okay, and that's it from my side. Thank you so much. If you have any question, please feel free to email me. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra, for your presentation. So if you have any question to her, also you can send it to her directly, or you can put the chat box on the webinar. So now let's invite our second presenter, Terry Tador, Open Burning Theme Lead Engineering X. Terry? Please go ahead.
Hiya, I think that I'm going to go first and then pass on to Terry. Great. Let me just share my. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having us. So I'm Charlie Fenn, and I'm the program manager of the Safer End of Engineered Life program at Engineering X. And we're going to talk a bit about what we do, and Terry's going to talk about sort of some global legislative frameworks in open burning as well. Sorry, one second. So we commissioned the global review on safer end of engineered life in January 2020, and this was done in partnership with the University of Leeds in the UK. And this aimed to understand what happened to consumer goods and other engineered products at the end of their useful life. The research identified the harm caused by open burning of waste, many of which Sandra has just pointed out in her presentation, and it called for urgent action to tackle the neglected issue that has catastrophic effects on the human health and environment. So in particular as well, it identified risks to informal waste workers and vulnerable populations, for example, children, older people, pregnant women, as well as the risks posed through the pollution of land, air and water. So following this evidence gathering, we sought in partnership to raise the issue on the global agenda and catalyse action around this long neglected issue. So this is a quick sort of overview of our journey. We held 2 workshops in partnership with the International Solid Waste Association, bringing together 15 people from 23 different countries. This consolidated the findings from the global review and informed the future of our work. So from this, we leveraged the climate angle through the partnership with the United Nations High-Level Climate Champions. And we have 2 climate consultants seconded there, Professor Desta Mbaratu and Dr. Andriana Mbandi. And they published a report earlier on this year on the open burning in Africa, challenges and opportunities. And I'll talk a little bit about their key findings from that in a moment. But this is available on our website as well. And they've been working on moving the topic higher up the high-level agenda. This year, we've had significant momentum in this space in partnership with lots of people in the session as well. So at COP26 last year, it was the first time that this issue was raised on any high-level agenda. And since then, we've had side events at Sustainability Research and Innovation Congress, AfriCities, an implementation lab at Africa Climate Week, and it was on the main agenda at African Ministerial Conference on Environment, after which a resolution was passed by 54 African ministers committed to ending open burning in Africa. So that leads us to COP27, and following a solutions roundtable hosted by the United Cities Local Governments of Africa, we launched a multi-stakeholder partnership that Sandra mentioned, and I will now talk a little bit about that. So the multi-stakeholder partnership pledges to phase out open burning by 6% in 2030 and eliminate it by 2040 in Africa. So these are the partners that are signed up. So the co-sponsors are African Ministerial Conference on Environment, United Cities and Local Governments of Africa, Engineering X, and United Nations High-Level Climate Champions. And our partners at the moment are Climate and Clean Air Coalition, Practical Action, and ICLE Africa. And we're looking for more partners to join us as well. So if you're interested, please do let me know. Or if you do know Desta and Andriana, can email them directly. So I'll quickly present some of the key findings from their report. And please note, they are unable to be here, and I'm by no means expert, and they wrote this report, but I'm just merely the messenger. So please let me know any questions and I can sort of pass those on, or Terry can answer them as well. So some key areas that they sort of found. So 70 to 80% of municipal solid waste generated in African cities is recyclable, and this has an estimated economic value of 8 billion USD. And at the moment, only about 11% is recycled. And in that sort of like in that recycling, informal sector and informal waste pickers handle most of that recovery. And they've put this kind of down to lack of public awareness, weak legislation and enforcement, and insufficient budgetary provision of waste collection and disposal, especially at the municipal level, and inadequate and malfunctioning operation equipment and inadequate governance frameworks. Sorry, 1 second. So some of the treatment options that they found so far, so the black soldier fly for biodegradable waste, and the application of the Fukuoka method for landfill, so if I'm not saying that correctly, and there's sort of implementing those alongside reduce, reuse, recycle principles. So the main sort of finding from the report is the need for change, and they've identified sort of 4 areas, and those are attitudinal, so changing the mindset of the general public, private sector and policymakers on waste generation and management. Institutional, introducing and enforcing contextual regulation and economic instruments that incentivize waste reduction and utilization as secondary resources, so looking at circular economy. Infrastructural, building efficient infrastructure mix with distributed grid that reduces the environmental and climate impact. And operational, building the required operational and technical skill sets for implementing integrated waste management hierarchy. And doing all of this with looking at systematic inclusion of the informal waste recyclers in solutions. So you can find the report on our website, but they also noted a large data gap in the space. We are seeking to do this through our grant funding call, which just closed, as well as trying to address the financing gap, which we're also doing through our grant scheme. So just really quickly, we recently launched a global grant call in collaboration with Dr. Terry Tudor, who's you're about to hear from, and Dr. Mansour Ali. And this aims to raise awareness, build evidence, and increase knowledge sharing and decrease the practice of open burning ultimately. So I'm now going to pass to Dr. Terry Tudor to speak a bit on global legislative frameworks.
Thank you, Charlie. Morning, afternoon, everybody, wherever you are. So as Charlie said, I'm just going to got a few slides, just going to briefly take you through what we call what I'm terming as legislative frameworks, and by that I'm referring to things like, for example, treaties and conventions. So that's basically what I'm kind of referring to. So, and these frameworks obviously form a key aspect as it relates to how open waste is managed and governed within a global context. Next. However, so we've done some work recently looking at these frameworks, and one of the things that kind of comes across is that there are two key issues as it relates to the effectiveness of the implementation of these frameworks. So the first issue. Next slide, Charlie. Right. So the first key issue really is that there's a significant implementation and enforcement gap globally. And it's a significant challenge for many countries, and particularly in sort of global South countries, really. And if you click on the next slide, Charlie. And the other aspect really is that there's no one piece of legislation really that kind of governs the issues well. It tends to be covered in a number of different areas. So next. So this graphic basically just gives an indication as regarding the first point. And you can sort of see where, particularly in the global South countries, there's significant issues as it relates to enforcement and implementation of the legislative measures, particularly across, like for example, South America, across Africa, Far East, and Southeast Asia. So significant issues as it relates to implementation, and the top one as well just basically shows it the similar situation. Next slide. So I mentioned earlier in terms of the fact that there's no one piece of sort of legislation or framework that governs the issue. And when we looked at it, we realized that they kind of fell into key categories of areas. So next bit. So the existing pieces of legislation kind of fell into, for example, into sort of waste management structure. So they look, for example, at things as I put there in terms of conventional transboundary movement or extended producer responsibility. So waste management is one kind of contextual area or context or category that the legislative frameworks fell into. They also fell into sort of looking at climate change as well too, and I've put some examples there, including Agenda 2063, which is a broad African context for economic development across the continent. You've also got that they also kind of fall into this kind of pollution control, and that also covers things about health and risk. And I've put some examples there as well. But interesting, so generally they all fall into those three areas, but there's also another one which perhaps might not be as apparent or readily apparent. You also find that there are some elements that also fall into perhaps a more kind of social and rights of individual pieces of legislation. And again, I've put some examples there because these pieces of legislation really deal, for example, with the, as I said, in terms of protection of the individuals who are impacted by the open waste burning. And we know that, for example, that children often tend to be the ones who are, for example, working on the landfill site. So these pieces of legislation covered those areas. Next. So quickly in terms of overcoming challenges, so Charlie kind of encapsulated quite well what Engineering X is doing in this space, and just kind of highlight the UN high-level climate champions, Destin and Adriana, that Charlie mentioned earlier, and the work that's been done with other partners, in conjunction with other partners at COP26 and more recently at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. So certainly that's one way in which we are trying to overcome the issue. Secondly, also, I think it's important to kind of host different fora, but it's within that context, it's important that there is a coalition, there's a combination of different stakeholders coming from different perspectives, because that holistic perspective is important in order to be able to come up with workable solutions. So it's important to have the policymakers, but also the practitioners as well. And then thirdly, in terms of a number of different aspects as it relates to support, and that support can be in terms of provision of training, in terms of provision of funding, as Charlie mentioned earlier, but also as it relates to sharing of best practice and skills. So that's it, I think. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlie and Terry. So I should have explained both of you at the joint presentation from the Engineering X. So thank you so much for your presentation. So now let's invite our next speaker, Aditi Ramala, the Technical Director, Technical Cooperation International Solid Waste Association, ISWA. Aditi?
Thank you, Anderson. Hi, everyone. It's a real pleasure for me to be here. Thank you for the invitation to talk about this critical topic. My name is Ramala, and I work in Next slide, please. Next slide, yeah, thank you. So just briefly about where I work, ISWA is a global independent and non-profit association that promotes sustainable, comprehensive and professional waste management while also promoting a transition to a circular economy. We are a member-based organization that is headquartered in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. And you can find out more about our activities and what we do on our website, www.iswa.org. Next slide, please. So I want to show you here just a few pictures of open burning of municipal solid waste in case you haven't seen this before. Here you just see waste that's scattered all over. Clearly this place lacks waste collection. If there's any waste collection, it's not frequent enough. If you go to the next slide, please. Here you see that the waste has disappeared. So clearly some burning has taken place between the two photographs. It was the same location, actually, just one day apart. Next slide, please. And similarly, you can see waste has been burnt there. And next slide, please. So on any given day, essentially, you see several piles of smoldering waste from, just scattered across the city and surrounding municipalities. So this is a widely practiced and common problem, as you just heard from Terry and Charlie. And this is happening on the outskirts of big cities and towns where these areas are producing almost the same amount of waste as being produced in the city, but the formal collection systems are not reaching them. Next slide, please. So as you've heard from the previous speakers, that this is a practice that's being globally practiced, and it's taking place daily, sometimes several times a day, mostly in places where there is a severe lack of waste collection or management. So infrastructure, And what studies have shown is that, the practices are damaging the health of tens of millions of people. And some estimates, as you heard from Sandra as well, is that between 30 to 40% of global waste is being openly burned as we speak right now. And so there's a clear lack of data still about the practice, because the open burning of waste is perceived as a highly localized issue, and it depends on the waste management services available in that locality. And as you've heard from previous speakers as well, is that it's a dangerous practice that's it's also overlooked quite a lot. But our webinars and events such as ours and coalitions such as ours are actually changing this. But there is more research that is needed to be done to understand the true impact of the problem. Because what we've seen is that basically open burning of waste is characteristically a form of a very low temperature combustion, and it releases a lot of emissions and contaminants that lead to basically air pollution and also impact human health and in the environment as well. So there are both effects, environmental and climate impacts, through the release of black carbon, which is a short-lived climate pollutant, which Sandra was also referring to, and it has a global warming potential of up to 5,000 times higher than CO2, which is carbon dioxide. And despite this huge cost, there is, this topic has been neglected. At least the last 2-3 years, we've seen a lot of research going on by Engineering X, and we've taken this issue to COP as well. But progress has been slower than we would like it to be, and collective action is urgently needed. So if you go to the next slide, I'd like to actually talk about why is this taking place? What are the priority areas, or what are the challenges that are being faced by national and subnational governments, mostly in low and middle income countries currently, in improving these waste systems or waste infrastructure and so on. So what we're seeing is that a simple answer to this very complicated and complex question is that people are burning waste because they feel that's the only option or the choice that they have in terms of disposal or getting rid of their waste. And it could be, as I mentioned before, because of lack of collection systems and so on. So because when waste is piling up, as you can see in this photograph, it causes bad odor and it attracts animals and rodents, which can transmit disease and pathogens. So people burn the waste because it actually destroys several pathogens that would otherwise spread disease. So in a very strange way, this open burning of waste, which I've mentioned is harmful for the environment as well as human health, is offering a very, in a very strange way, a sense of benefit for the people who are disadvantaged or who have no access or any other means of disposing and getting rid of the waste. So till now, we've been mentioning a lot of, of the open burning being carried out by individuals, by people, by little shops, and the public who are getting rid of the waste. But through the research that has been carried out by Engineering X team, and through the workshops that we conducted and the stakeholder dialogues that we conducted, that there is evidence that open burning is actually sometimes also carried out by municipal authorities across the globe on dump sites to as a form of treatment or reducing volumes on their dump sites. And then you also heard that people are burning waste to get to materials that are very hard to access. Just to give you an example, people burn copper wires to get to copper, or other e-waste to get other materials and valuable substances out. So it's a very complex issue, and it needs a truly multidisciplinary approach to effectively understand and tackle it. And Sandra mentioned some good coalitions that are working together, because compared to, say, issues of climate change or marine litter or plastic pollution, the world's attention is on those issues right now, but open burning is not yet, at that level. So it needs a coordinated effort. And this, this kind of dialogue that we're having today is changing that perception as well. So we have a fair understanding of why open burning of waste is taking place, and now we can talk about how do we tackle that issue. And if we go to the next slide, some good lessons that we've learned through our work and what we can share. One of the main things that I think all the speakers before me have also referred to as a good starting point would be to start local, to develop local solutions, simultaneously develop national capacity. So to work with municipalities, subnational entities, as well as the national governments. Sandra mentioned bringing this issue into NDCs, or what are known as the nationally determined contributions, talking about eliminating open burning of waste and so on. So having global initiatives is very important to start a dialogue, to share best practices, to exchange notes, and so on. And there are some actions that we can actually take immediately. And that would be to actually start or extend waste collection to all, while at the same time, because just waste collection will not solve the issue, is we need to at the same time develop systems and install capacities to treat this and to treat this waste and work with it in a safe and sound manner. So an action that can be taken at a local level is to find the proper place to dispose of the waste so that citizens and businesses can stop the practice, at least individually. And this has to involve the administration and the decision makers from the municipality to focus on the right places for people to send their waste and improve waste management systems and set up integrated sustainable waste management systems locally as well. Then we need to also raise awareness, as we are doing now, about the impacts, because a lot of times what happens is the people who are practicing this are not aware of the consequences of what they're doing. And so we need to make sure that global safety challenges that are associated with open burning of waste and the waste pickers and the informal sector that's practicing it, they are well aware of what's happening. So we need, again, a multi-stakeholder dialogue. We need to develop holistic and strategic ways. And then last but not least, we need to find good and easy alternatives of open burning, because currently the people who are practicing it, it is the easiest form for them to dispose of the waste. And as Honda-san referred to in the beginning, is also the cheapest, or at least what they perceive as the cheapest, when they don't look at the impacts. So this is where we can work with innovators and researchers and entrepreneurs. They can play a very important part to come up with very practical solutions, whether it's valorization of the materials from the waste stream or technologies to handle and treat the waste, just to make it easier for waste workers to access the metals, or, as I said, hard substances that you get to by burning a copper wire or some other form of e-waste. So if we come up with these solutions, that would be a good way to go forward. And I'll stop here as my time is up. I'll pass it over to my colleagues, and thank you so much for having me. If you go to the next slide, my email is up here. If you have any questions about the work we're doing on this topic, or whether you would like to join us, please feel free to reach out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aditi, for your presentation, giving the your thought about the open burning of waste. So then let's invite next speaker, Ann Tsao, co-director and co-founder, Rock Environment and Energy Institute.
Hello, thank you very much. It's a very pleasure to join this webinar. And let me share my screen. Thank you again for inviting me to share some experience, our work about the municipal solid waste management. So my topic is about the lesson from China about open burning management. Firstly, REI, our group, is an independent think tank working on energy transition and climate policy in the past 10 years. We try to promote more open-minded and participatory policy debates in China. Regarding the impact of the open burning on environmental health is widely researched and known by professionals, policymakers. But as our previous speaker mentioned, it's sometimes difficult to get people's awareness in the general public. But here we can see the statistic about the impact from both China and the US policy researchers. I will not go into the details, but I just showed some data from like the emission factors of the open burning in China. This chart shows how serious the emissions from the straw burning in very middle of the country, like Henan, Shandong, and South Hebei in the North China plain. So because the agriculture and the population are very concentrated in that region, so you can see the very polluted in terms of the PM 2.5. And due to the relatively high population, as I mentioned, those agriculture-driven open burning happened in the middle of the country, and also in some very developed, like Jiangsu province next to Shanghai. They account for quite a big percentage of the national emission. But this is kind of situation in the past, because China, due to the very serious command and control regulations on air pollution control and also the municipal solid waste management, the situation is much better than before. Firstly, it's about the collection rate. In urban areas, nearly all MSW will be collected by the service, and in the rural areas, people are not encouraged, but even fined to if they burn the waste. And for the agriculture-driven open burning, like straw burning, was banned in 1990s. And due to and thanks to the strict policy, the open burning in urban areas and has been very rare in recent years. I mean, in recent years means since the past 5 to 10 years, but it's still happening, still taking place in the rural areas. And due to the vast size of the country, the local government has a big role in controlling the open burning management. But the central government also gives some incentives, financial incentives and some policy incentives to encourage farmers to recycle agriculture waste. And for rural areas, I will share a case study in China. Some NGOs, some civil society groups, they work together to help the rural residents to control the waste generation in a more sustainable way. So basically, first, enhancing the classification and collection rate to increase the recycling rate. For the organic waste, they support residents to use composting to reduce the waste disposal and also increase some financial security for the rural waste treatment. So here is a case in the Dongyang. It's a very small county. They target the household waste, and they firstly help people to raise their awareness of the treating the waste more sustainable way, benefiting their health and environment. They increase recycling rate, and they specifically divide the food waste to do the composting, and they also help them to do the mixed landfill or incineration, the small scale incineration. Because in the rural areas, the recycling is attractive in terms of the economic benefit by selling the recycled product into the market. So here are some detailed steps and some pictures to show in the rural areas how they work together. And this picture is very interesting, and they also have some board to demonstrate everyone's performance, and they use this information disclosure to help people have kind of peer pressure and even compete. So I think this is a very interesting way to make people, immobilize people to work together with this NGO. Okay, I stop here. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for your presentation. Also, there are very interesting presentation files, how to involve local people to take action to avoid open burning, in particular, how they can strengthen the action for segregation of waste at the sources. So that would be one of the key information. Thank you so much. So then let's invite our last speakers at joint presentation, the Bima and Kumara from IGES. So Bima or Kumara, please.
So thank you very much, Honda-san, for the introduction. So myself and Dr. Bima would like to share some of our ongoing research work on open waste burning in Asia. So Bima, can you go to the next slide? So as our previous speakers have already highlighted, the open waste burning generates emissions that impact air pollution, human health, and contribute significantly to climate change. But at the same time, we found especially in the Asia Pacific region, the scientific evidence of the open burning waste is still limited, particularly when it's come to the climate impact, including greenhouse gas and black carbon emissions and short-lived climate pollutants. So in this case, so SCCT is in partnership with UNEP ITC, CCAC, and other partners like today we join ISWA, Engineering X, and other scientific communities. We are working on studying open burning, waste burning, and building capacity materials and doing scientific research at the local level. But now what we see is the time is important to have more regional analysis in the open waste burning in national and the regional level. So today we would like to share some of our key findings from a systematic review of open waste burning in ASEAN countries. So I would like to invite Dr. Bima to share the results.
Okay, thank you, Kumarasan. Yeah, as you may know, the open burning issues are always linked with the reduce of air pollution and its human health impact. A scientific finding reported that waste burning can cause cancer and many others health impact. Meanwhile, open burning of waste is still being the highest disposal practice in the developing countries. Since we know that the information of open burning of waste is still lack, status of open burning and its impact on environment and human health. So we try to determine the current status of open burning and its impact on the environment. Then we also analyze the factors that triggering the people to do burning practice and how are initiatives to stop it. At the end, we assess some policy recommendation for reducing the waste burning in Southeast Asian countries. To answer all of the objectives, we use the survey by extracting metadata from database of Scopus using the keywords of open burning. And some criteria such as affiliation, relevancy, document type, language, and the age of publication we use to screen the data. And we take like 152 from more than 60,000 documents. And the documents are limited to the research of review paper, which focus on Southeast Asia countries. And the metadata will be analyzed using Force Viewer software to find the research gap and direction, while the qualitative analysis was used to identify factors, initiative, and assess the recommendation. So here we show you about the result of our studies. So from the title and abstract of the collected documents, we found the words of open burning is strongly connected to the biomass burning, which makes significant environmental health and risk in Southeast Asian countries. And also from the keywords, as you see here, we spotted research gap in the 3 clusters, which include municipal waste burning, indicated by the orange color, and then e-waste, indicated with the blue color, and also the fire hotspot with the dark blue color in the left side of the image. And also, as you can see from the slide, the country affiliation, we also found that researchers from Thailand has the highest contribution in open burning research, followed by Indonesia, Japan, Vietnam, and Malaysia. And some clusters are found which showing the existing collaboration between the countries, indicating a research connection and concern of each country to the open burning related problems. Then, as a summary of the bibliometric analysis, we conclude that at a regional level, especially in Southeast Asia, biomass burning is the primary concern of the researchers. A small amount of municipal solid waste, e-waste, and special case burning studies are also found, which indicating the research gap in the area. So in here, when we look deeply on biomass burning, most of them are talking about the forest fire and crop residue. This indicates the urgency of the problem and its impact to the residents, especially in Thailand, because you see the study location is most of them is in Thailand. And also we found about the health impact. We also found the municipal and e-waste burning are also giving a similar adverse health effect to the human, but it's limited. The research is limited. And another interesting findings that we found, biomass burning is also can give a significant contribution to the global warming since it emits a lot of CO2 and also black carbon to the air. Meanwhile, the black carbon emission from municipal solid waste burning in Philippines, as I spotted in the circle, has the similar potential impact of BC emitted from rice straw residue burning in Vietnam. Therefore, the number of emission from municipal solid waste and e-waste burning is not fully understood. Waste collection efficiency, as mentioned by other speakers before, is also an important things that we should consider. So we try to collect the data from the regional sector, how many waste that, because it can be used for determine how many waste that may be burned. As you see, in average, 57% of waste are not collected in ASEAN countries, which subjected to improper waste disposal. However, this data still needs some country-level validation since the data taken from the internet may not be updated and have different assumptions. So then we try to connect this profile with the data collected, and it is estimated around 50% of waste is burned based on Thailand and Philippines experience. Therefore, we also know that the plastic composition in the waste being burned have a high portion in the burning activities. So plastic waste can emit a higher black carbon emission than other type of waste. As you see, the PET and also polystyrene have the highest emission compared to others. And also compared to municipal or domestic waste, e-waste may not be significant in terms of generation. However, since by now we use a lot of technologies and electronic devices, the number of e-waste per capita may increase yearly. And since we already know the impact of open burning, why people still do that practice? Here we also summarize some technical and non-technical factors which encourage people doing this bad practice. So there are many kind of factors that impact to the why people still burning. So then we also highlighted some initiatives that are already done in Philippines, Indonesia, and Thailand. Those efforts might be useful as a best practice for reducing waste burning activity at country level. So there are decentralized waste management system, and then community empowerment, and also zero burning policy in upper northern Thailand. So in conclusion, first, we can see that many researchers now are focusing on crop residue burning, especially for Southeast Asian country, while municipal solid waste and e-waste burning are lagged. Municipal solid waste burning can emit significant number of pollutants with the same or even higher than biomass burning. Last, we endorse more work in the municipal solid waste and also e-waste sectors to provide baseline data for appropriate policy recommendation. In this study, we also gather several recommendations from the literature that we think that may be useful to reduce the open burning activity. So thank you so much for listening. Please feel free to contact me on email if you need more information or want to have some discussion with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bima and Kumana, for your joint presentation. So now we have only 5 more minutes to conclude our thematic track. But so let me start summarizing our session, then I'm going to close our session. But we're going to have one question, but I'm going to touch upon that question as part of my conclusion or summary of the session. So I do understand that the open burning is still common operations for many countries. Even though many people may be aware of such adverse impact to human health and the environment. So they do recognize the negative side of the open burning of waste. But unfortunately, the open burning is only available options for them. This is unfortunate. So we have to continue supporting them how they can change their practices from environmentally unsound management by burning waste to something like environmental sound management of waste. But in that case, we have to really change people's behavior to segregate waste at the source, at least organic waste, inorganic waste. Then inorganic waste may be sent to recycling centers or something for recycling. Then only organic municipal solid waste may be, unfortunately, still to be sent to the open dumping site, then open burned, but at least it will be the first step towards elimination of the open burning of waste. So people's behavior should be changed, at least. And as many colleagues today mentioned that we have only limited knowledge and expertise of open burning of waste. We need more scientific evidence. We need more work academically to get the scientific knowledge of open burning. We understand generally that open burning is mismanagement, but we have to show some evidences why open burning of waste causes adverse impact to human health and the environment. And if we can show some evidence scientifically, people may be able to easily understand why we have to stop burning waste. And there are some international approach, as Sandra mentioned, as my colleagues mentioned, that we UNEP has been working on climate clean air coalition, so CCAC, to work together with many stakeholders to combat these issues globally. But the other UN agencies also work together. So this is domestic issue, but this is common issue around the world. So at global level, we have to look at how to close open burning of waste. But we have to continue supporting local players, try to close open burning of waste. But in that case, we have to have some regulation and legislation and rule and policies to force relevant stakeholders stop open burning of waste. So they may need incentives, or they may need some support. So at least the local people need to get some support from, for example, CCT, UNEP, Engineering X, and other organizations. But for those purposes, I saw one good practices that Engineering X has been implementing one good practices to provide funds to the organization who try to stop open burning of waste and other relevant activities. So that would be one of the incentives to close open burning of waste. And also, this is my first time to see the situation of China, that China has been taking a lot of effort to improve municipal solid waste management and to close open burning. So that is one of the good news for the international community, that China has been taking a lot of efforts. Also, UNEP has one office in Beijing, and we do have some collaboration with local people to improve the municipal solid waste management as a whole, but also to try to stop burning of waste in China. So as my final remark or summary, that unfortunately, we only expect that we would generate more municipal solid waste in coming 20, 30, 40 years, because simply population will be booming. So we think by 2050, so the population would hit about 10 billion. So we would generate more waste. That means we expect that we see more unfortunate situation of the open burning of waste. So it is not a simple issue, but we have to take actions to try to stop open burning as much as possible, even though open burning of the waste would be continued. Then I believe that this schematic track provided great opportunity for us to update our knowledge and information on open burning of waste. Also, we saw some possibility to further collaborate together. And as the Bima and Kumara mentioned, that we are getting more knowledge and expertise from the researchers. So it to provide further idea how we can collaborate together to combat this global but domestic issues of open burning of waste. So that's all my summary. And then, so now time is close to our thematic session, but before that, I have one announcement. So after we close this session, so you are going to get pop-up window to answer the survey. So please answer those survey. So it will help us to improve our sessions and the conference. So with that, I'd like to close the thematic track for 14, the global initiatives and good practices for mitigating open burning of waste. So thank you for your participant and thank you for your time to join us. Thank you so much.